Good evening. This is Metta Spencer here in Toronto, and I have a real treat on for tonight. I'm going to speak to a friend of mine, Cesar Jaramillo, and we're going to do this all by ourselves today. There's no other panelists around, just him and me and you folks.
God help us.
And a few thousand other people out there. So Cesar Jaramillo is somebody I have met in lots and lots of meetings over the last several years, but I'm not sure we ever sat down one-to-one and had a chat over a cup of coffee or a beer. So I have brought a glass of water here, which will have to stand in for my beer until after the show. And in the meantime, we are going to pretend that he and I are having a good conversation over a cup of coffee or a beer.
Indeed.
And indeed.
I will say we have had some wine for sure.
All right.
Not one-on-one perhaps, but we've had...
That's what I'm missing, is the fact that I've never had a really personal conversation with you. Right. I know that you came from Colombia. Correct. I know that you have twins.
Yes.
And I know you have a wife someplace whom I've never met.
Yes.
But your history of how you came from Colombia to Canada has been a great mystery to me all this time.
Right.
So I would like you to explain a little about your own personal history before we get down to talking about peace issues.
Absolutely. Metta, first of all, let me say thank you for the invitation. It's great as always to have the opportunity to chat with you and I as I often do, because it's not the first time, I'm always in awe of everything that you do. Trying to save the world and trying to connect different players with different areas of expertise, and not just for yourself, but always trying to find platforms to bring this to a wider audience in Toronto, and now with technology to the world, to whoever wants to hear your guests. So it's always a pleasure.
Thing that I enjoy the most, because it's just great fun. This is my social life.
Right. Social media, literally.
And we are indeed a mutual admiration society, because I'm in awe of all the things that you do too. You're a very impressive man.
Okay, thank you very much. So my a bit of my history. So I'm from Colombia, and I came to Canada as an adult. As it happens, I'm born and raised in Colombia, and in fact, I went to university in Colombia. And my first university degree is from a Colombian university in journalism and communications. But then what I might refer to as my second life, after I came to Canada, I went back to university for political science and just took a different stream, if you will, educationally. But interestingly,
sorry, was that the University of Waterloo?
University of Waterloo, political science, and then at the graduate level, global governance, which was also the University of Waterloo, but this master's program was University of Waterloo with the Balsillie School of International Affairs. Balsillie referring to Jim Balsillie, the former RIM co-chairman or co-CEO, who spent made a lot of financial contributions here in the community. So yeah, but it was essentially UW. But when I went to UW for political science, for me, it was going back to university. I mean, after I guess at some point I might have assumed I was done with the university, at least for a while, but this was like starting over. But when I first came, and we were with some colleagues reminiscing a little bit about this, because the Safe Third Country Agreement, which you may be familiar with, between Canada and the United States, Safe Third Country Agreement has been in the news quite a lot lately, and because of Trump's recent measures that are affecting migrants in the United States, or would-be migrants, or would-be asylum seekers. Anyway, as it happens, I am part of the very last group of asylum seekers coming to Canada just before the Safe Third Country Agreement came into effect. And the reason I tell you this is because the actual entry into Canada part, because the Safe Third Country Agreement was imminent, its entry into force, turned out into a quite dramatic occurrence, and it's still to this day one of the most intense or dramatic sort of developments that I've been involved with, and it is my coming to Canada seeking asylum at the land border between Ontario and New York State, basically. So before the Safe Third Country Agreement came into effect, Canada considered asylum applications at the border in a very orderly fashion and a very limited number per day, like a handful literally of applicants per day on a very, again, orderly fashion. I was with hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 would-be refugee claimants at a refugee shelter in Buffalo, New York. Everyone patient, some there for months, everyone patiently awaiting their turn to come to the border. But then this big news came that the Safe Third Country Agreement was going to come into effect. And I remember back then, I left Colombia in 2004, by the way. This is 2004. And I remember then, most people, or many, didn't even understand exactly what was happening, that the Safe Third Country Agreement was going to come into effect. But the word of mouth sort of that was circulating among refugees or would-be refugees was they're going to close the border. They're going to close the border. That was the way it was transmitted from person to person. And people started to panic because that was, it was going to change everything, and it was imminent. And then one day, this is just before Christmas, 2004, the news came like a flash. They're going to close the border in 2 days, the day after tomorrow. And people, and even mathematically, it was impossible. There were literally about 1,000 people there, and the Canadian officials would consider maybe a handful of people or a handful of families a day, but nowhere near close. I mean, this would, at that rate, would have taken months, if not or longer. So people were in a little bit in panic mode. And this is a shelter, as I mentioned, in Buffalo, New York, and it had a huge basement. And there were people from all perhaps what you would expect to be, the typical refugee producing countries in the world. So there were fellow Colombians, there were Asians, there were people from Eritrea, there were, from all the Sudanese, some of the world's hotspots. And we were gathered in the basement, and there were some guidance from some religious type figures and pro bono immigration lawyers or paralegals that were advising people. I remember there were language issues because there were all sorts of languages there, and somebody said, "Let's go to the border, to Peace Bridge, in mass." It's the only thing we could think of at the moment. And some people panicked and they said, no, it's going to be against the law. And some people, I'm sure, uninformed, saying, if they're going to arrest you, let them arrest you, and you can make the refugee claim from within Canada. And there was some logic to it, I guess, but I'm sure it wasn't a legal opinion. It was just people throwing ideas around. And there were children and elderly people and families. But that was the agreement. Let's go to the border. Let's keep it quiet, and let's just show up at the border. And this is a harsh winter. This is late 2004. And many people underdressed and not prepared for that, and panic in the air. These are vulnerable people to begin with. So the day came, and everyone was there, and people started calling cabs, taxi cabs. And people were standing, freezing, just dozens of people. And I have some pictures of this because my journalistic mind back then, I'm like, okay, I'm living this, but I need to document it somehow as well. So I was also taking pictures. And the taxi cabs were not sufficient. There weren't enough for everybody. And we soon realized that, and they said at noon at Peace Bridge. And there was a sense in the air that if you're not there at noon, it's the shot of your life. Like literally, like you're gonna lose out on any potential chance. But there was no clarity what was gonna happen anyway. But you had to be there. And some people in the neighborhood took notice of the drama and the loads of people looking for taxi cabs, desperate for taxi cabs. And I remember many actually made a bit of business opportunity, and what would normally be a $30 taxi ride or something, they were charging $100, $150 to $100 to take people whose desperation that they saw. And I remember, paying some pickup truck driver, like an outrageous amount of money that I didn't have. I mean, I had it, but that I was saving very religiously because I had no idea what was going to happen. So anyway, so we got to Peace Bridge, and there was a complete uncertainty, and the poor, Canadian officials who I've always admired for their friendliness, their immigration officials, I think they were in awe and overwhelmed and not knowing what the heck was happening. People were literally coming and coming and coming. And as I was getting there in this super expensive pickup truck from the neighborhood, you would see like crossing Peace Bridge, a very surreal image. You would see like perhaps because not everyone could afford even those expensive pickup trucks and alternative modes of transport. So you would see literally a family of a single African mom with 3 little children hauling, their life's belongings in a bag over the snow, over Peace Bridge between the United States of America and Canada. It was just a very surreal image because perhaps one thinks refugees and you think sub-Saharan Africa or something, but these were like winter refugees, in these two super industrialized nations. So anyway, so there was something odd about the whole thing. In any case, we started showing up, and more people coming in, and more people coming in, and soon enough, they realized that this was a peculiar situation, that it wasn't a coincidence that all these people were showing up at the same time, and I presume they had to go. I'm speculating. I presume they had to call higher ups from Ottawa or to consult. And but eventually, I mean, we spent some people more than 24 hours, but the situation was such that people needed to either the officials, I mean, to resolve the situation, either turn people back or give them some sort of solution, because we were officially sort of trying to make an asylum claim just in very unorthodox circumstances. I would say. So, and eventually the Red Cross showed up and the Salvation Army and never had I knew we were, of course, deliberate. We were making an asylum claim and knew it, but I remember I have this image with the Red Cross blanket where for the first time ever and perhaps more than ever before and since, felt like a refugee, like an actual refugee. I'm drinking sort of Salvation Army soup and with this blanket.
It all worked.
The what?
It all worked. Eventually, you got in.
Eventually, yes. So what they did was, and I think, and I'm really, this is the very last batch ever that could do this, because since the Safe Third Country Agreement came into effect, you can no longer do that. Now, if you do what I did, they will tell you at the border, we consider the U.S. to be a safe country. And you set foot there first, so they have to deal with you. And that's a bit, well, an oversimplification, but that's the gist of it. So what they told us then was that after much internal consulting, I imagine the powers that be in Ottawa or elsewhere, they said, listen, but they had sent like a bunch of school buses from Niagara region and for the heat. I mean, the Canadians being Canadians and compassionate and humanitarian for the heater, but there was such a language barrier that some people, I remember Spanish speakers who didn't speak English, saying, they're going to send us back. Don't get in the buses. They're going to send us back. And I was one of the few that I already spoke English when I came to Canada. So I'm like, no, it's for the heat. It's for the heat. We're freezing over here. So eventually, immigration officials went bus by bus and told us, listen, no one is staying in Canada today. And people initially, resisted and heckled, and they're like, no, no, no. But then the officials said, but we're going to make an exception. Everyone who's here physically today will get an appointment for a date after the Safe Third Country Agreement has come into effect, which is like tomorrow. But you will be treated with the old rules, as if they had Safe Third Country, but only the people who were there that day on that moment. So everyone got a letter. And I remember exactly my date, the day that I was given, and the sigh of relief. And it was a very bizarre experience, the whole thing. And then when I eventually came to Canada to seek asylum, then it wasn't, at that point, they have said nothing of the merits of your claim. They're just letting you do it in Canada. That's it. So when I came to do it, and then they said, where are you going? Okay, you can continue the claim within Canada. And many people had already relatives in Canada. So they said, yeah, I have a niece in Mississauga, or my sister lives in Winnipeg, what have you. But anyway, I had no relatives or acquaintances really at all whatsoever in Canada. So they called again this nun or religious type figure, and this is in Fort Erie, right after making like a very initial security clearance, not a refugee determination, just making sure you're not like a wanted war criminal, those sorts of things. And so they gave me an address, go to Toronto, to this refugee shelter. And anyway, and that was my first place of residence for a few months in Canada, in this Toronto refugee shelter.
What I'm not clear about is what your grounds for being a refugee were. You had...
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't said anything about that, actually. I haven't said...
Right, you haven't said about that. And of course, that's one of the main things I want to know.
Right.
There was a war in Colombia, but how did
there was a war in Colombia, and and it was it has subsided quite a bit by now, but back then, it was the war in the Americas, I would say, the quintessential war in the Americas, the typical protracted conflict where no one thought the guerrillas were ever be strong to take over power, but they weren't weak enough to be defeated either. So it was like always there. But under refugee law, at least under my understanding, Canadian refugee law, it's not by virtue of being Colombian, that alone doesn't make you eligible for refugee status, even if it is well known and undisputed that Colombia is undergoing a conflict.
But
how has it affected you?
You must have had some personal experience that you could cite as evidence that you were in danger if you went back.
That's correct. And yes, and there was and my wife, with whom we came together. Also, she was crucial to the case, and her family. I won't go into too much detail, but her father had been kidnapped and by the FARC guerrillas for ransom for months and threatened to kill, and just various security situations. So they give you, nothing is guaranteed, and they give you a date which can be a year or more after you've arrived, when you have a hearing with the Immigration and Refugee Board, and that's the day of your life, and that's the day that, I guess, in a way, changed my life, because that's when you make your case, basically, and they try to question it, and they ask the same question in a number of ways to test your credibility, and then at that point there are, three possible outcomes. Your claim is denied, which we knew a lot of people whose claims were denied, and you have, I think, 30 days to leave Canada. Or your claim is approved, sometimes on the spot, which is the best case scenario. You just wait for the paperwork later. And we had a sort of middle ground result from that hearing, which was that the judge would reserve his decision, and we would eventually hear in the mail, which was awful, just nerve-wracking.
condition was. And how long did you have to wait to get the answer?
After the hearing, it was perhaps 3 or 4 months. At which point, and I remember the exact moment when I opened the letter that I found under the apartment door with trepidation, not knowing, where it might go, whether 30 days to leave Canada or whether I was going to stay. So yeah, I mean, that's the summary version. I mean, I will mention one part. The part where I have lived the most since I came to Canada has been Waterloo, Ontario. Mm-hmm. And so I was at this refugee shelter in Toronto. And by default, my assumption was always that if I got to stay in Canada, if my asylum claim was approved, I was going to stay in Toronto. That Toronto was going to be the city for me, et cetera. And I didn't know Waterloo existed to begin with, or Kitchener, or, but apparently when we were at the shelter, there was some sort of organization, and I'm still not fully sure where they get their funding. I think their name was something like Housing Contacts. And what they did was try to get people out of the GTA, out of Toronto, because everyone gravitates to Toronto. So what they would do is they would pick us up at the shelter and drive you to different smaller municipalities and show you apartment units that had, vacancies and that sort of thing. And if they needed a co-signer, because you have no credit history when you arrive, then this Housing Contacts would sort of vouch for you in that regard. So they took to Barrie.
Yeah, they took you to Barrie. Well, do you think this is pretty much the story that you've told me? Is this similar at all to the way things work now, or what?
No, I mean the big change is the entry into force of the Safe Third Country Agreement, which is a huge change on the question of eligibility to even claim asylum, again, with no guarantee of outcome, to even claim asylum, right after I came and I made my claim. That's no longer possible. They have some exemptions, but generally that's no longer possible because of the assumption that the U.S. is safe for asylum seekers.
Well, but is it now? If indeed, I mean, I don't know that we want to go, this is not what we came here to talk about.
Right.
But if Trump makes it impossible for people to stay in the U.S., does it still, what are they going to do with you, with people like you? If they come to Canada because you think they won't let you stay in the U.S., what's the outcome going to be? Or has that come about yet?
It has come about, and there is now a legal challenge here in Canada to the Safe Third Country Agreement, and I'm not an immigration lawyer, but the key case to be made is that the U.S. is simply no longer safe for refugees, if it ever was. But certainly under Trump, with the executive orders that have been signed, with the rhetoric itself.
More than the rhetoric, because wasn't it last week, the Supreme Court has, in effect, endorsed his claim that he has the right to reject anybody he wants. And
yes,
he's certainly rejected
in that particular case that went to the court, yes. And again, the rhetoric, I think it's not to be dismissed. He recently also said that something along the lines of under him or in his watch, he would not let the United States become a refugee camp.
Yeah.
If that mentality.
People like you are an infestation.
Yes.
Insect.
European politicians, I was just, as it happens, writing a little bit on this. European politicians are openly using the infestation language and invasion language. One was using poison language. These are high-ranking. These are prime ministers of some countries. The prime minister of Italy, elected on an openly, right-wing populist anti-immigration platform. The prime minister of Hungary on an open, populist anti-immigrant platform. And if everyone, like Trump says, we will not become a refugee camp, if literally everyone embraces that mentality, you know, the logical conclusion is that there is nowhere really for the stateless migrants to go or to change.
And of course, I mean, Germany was doing Merkel was doing such a wonderful generosity, but I think it's only a couple of days last week that they had a meeting which was going to be decisive for her status, her own future, her career.
No, her own coalition has threatened to shut down German borders, and then the fear is a domino effect that if Germany shuts down borders, everyone shuts down borders, and farewell to the travel-free, passport-free Schengen zone.
Yeah. Well, apparently they put together some very lame kind of agreement that was sort of a quasi-agreement, but the way it sounded, the journalists put it, it didn't sound as if it was a very stable or.
No. It was heavily criticized, and one of the key features is the clear intent to offload responsibilities to Africa, to African countries, and to send intercepted migrants to African countries under the guise of of orderly processing in processing centers in Africa. But critics are saying that this is quite simply an outsourcing of responsibilities, because this isn't just a question of altruism. This is a question of international law. All of these these European states are parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention, and there are clear rights and responsibilities that are, again, not just acts of altruism.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a case to be made in Europe. I mean, I don't see the connection to this fight against Muslims, Trump's fight against Muslims and Mexicans.
Right.
But when it comes to the Syrian thing, I mean, all of those people risking their lives to get across the Mediterranean to try to go to Germany or someplace. And it seems to me, I remember talking to Mary Kaldor about this a couple of years ago. And, we were both of the same mind that it would have been a whole lot better for even Obama in those days to have set up safe zones inside Syria where they could say, come and inside, you got to leave your guns outside, come in and we'll put peacekeepers around and protect you. It would have violated the sovereignty of Syria, but they were violating Syria's in 1,000 other ways. But they could have kept those people safe anyway, so that many of those thousands of people who drowned and so on didn't have to do that, and they would have, obviated some of the problems that they encountered in Europe because of the arrival of
Absolutely. But I mean, what really irritates me, Metta, to be honest, is, well, many things irritate me. But, in this particular context, I think, there's a question of responsibility, of course, as duty and doing the right thing, and moral, ethical responsibility, humanitarian responsibility, which is not to be dismissed. But I think there's also something to be said about responsibility as accountability. And really doing a close look at what role the West writ large has played by action or omission in the very crisis that are generating these refugee flows. To this day, selling weapons to these regimes, as you well know, Saudi Arabia being the most egregious example, but there are others, and Western weapons in Yemen and South Sudan and Sudan.
Absolutely.
So, sometimes the debate gets, and I'm part of of the guilty party. The debate gets too technical. Compliance with the ATT and compliance with domestic and international regulations, and that's all true. But I think there are broader questions, just from a common sense perspective. Like, what do you think is going to happen? With the excessive accumulation of weapons year after year in what is already a volatile area of the world. Of course, it's going to explode or implode or however you see that pressure cooker. But then what strikes me is the the very poor dot connecting ability of the West, of failing to see, again, by action or omission, what level of responsibility and therefore what level of accountability they must own up to in these crises. But not only are they ignoring those key fundamental questions, they are actually turning their back on refugees. I mean, they're gradually racing to the bottom and weakening all the protections that international refugee law has traditionally afforded migrants. Yeah. And the rhetoric that, maybe they're not all fleeing persecution, these desperate women with their 3-year-old, swimming in the Mediterranean, something's got to be wrong for that level of desperation.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, now we've got you as far as Barry, but I'm not going to go to Barry. I want to get you into Waterloo and Project Ploughshares. And
right.
Could you tell me just a little bit about what Project Ploughshares is? I have to confess that only today somebody told me something that I had thought was not true anymore. And this person said I had sort of publicized the fact that I was going to talk to you tonight.
Right.
People saying, tune in, and if you can, and watch us. And then she wrote me and she said, you didn't mention the fact that Project Ploughshares is a project of the Canadian Council of Churches.
That is correct.
And I had thought that was no longer the case.
No, that is indeed correct, and has always been the case. I mean, pretty much for the past 40 years. A couple of years ago, we marked our 40th anniversary. So yeah, let me speak to that a little bit. So we are Project Ploughshares, founded in 1976. So it was 2 years ago we had a 40th anniversary here. Cesar Jaramillo, whom spoke with us on she came for our event. She was a keynote speaker. And we are a division of the Canadian Council of Churches. And we have, despite our association with the Canadian Council of Churches, we have worked with relative or considerable autonomy, I would say, and with the separate location. The CCC offices are in Toronto, close enough. But the main thing I would highlight is that the nature of our work, although founded on clear ethical, moral, theological principles, is and has always been secular. 100% secular in policy language. So perhaps that's why, to some people it might be news that we're part of the Canadian Council of Churches, but yeah, no, we work in a secular way. So we wouldn't say, for instance, necessarily that, or my main case for disarmament is not necessarily that we're threatening the Lord's creation or something like that. The case you will hear from me would be more along the lines of compliance with this article or that article of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And nuclear disarmament has been a core part of our programming since we were founded, a core part of our DNA, I would say. But it is not the only area that we follow. We follow nuclear disarmament. We follow the global arms trade and conventional weapons control and policy discussions related to this, most recently related to the International Arms Trade Treaty at the international level, and domestically trying to track and be vigilant of the arms deals of Canadian companies. We follow emerging military technologies and how this is fast changing the nature and the prospects of warfare. Within this, we look at lethal autonomous weapon systems, otherwise known as killer robots, and we consider the ways in which the development of such systems is raising very troubling questions around the compliance with international humanitarian law, with questions of accountability, of responsibility, of human control. Very tough questions and very new questions in the big scheme of things. So yes.
That whole issue about drones and killer robots.
Right.
I think last summer, or was it a year ago or so, that you went to there was a conference in Europe about the conference on certain conventional weapons.
CCW, yes.
Yes, which is responsible for if anything, making rules about both killer robots and drones.
Right.
And what was the tenor of the discussion there, and what has come of that since then? Has there been any move toward regulating or forbidding the development of such weapons, or rules about the rules of engagement, if you will? Because I know that, of course, Obama has been criticized more, I guess, for his lavish resort to drone warfare.
Right.
Almost anything else he did in military terms.
Right.
And I don't know whether it's that kind of warfare is continuing on the scale that he was doing it or not. And has there been any change in attitude toward the killer robots?
Yeah, no, and on the Obama thing, I know that even Obama admirers, I mean, this is one of the stains of his legacy that most people, friend or foe of Obama, will recognize, that, the use of drones. And problematic as though that usage of drones was by Obama, because there were questions of again, compliance with international humanitarian law, there was still a human being somewhere, whether it be, halfway around the world in an air conditioning room in California, with a joystick seemingly playing Nintendo, except you're, conducting an extrajudicial assassination. But there's a human being. With lethal autonomous weapon systems or fully autonomous weapon systems, the question is exponentially more difficult and profound, and its implications more profound. Project Ploughshares is part of something called the International Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, and we've been at the CCW in Geneva, and this is a file led by my colleague Branca Marian, and the base starting position or the primary position of the campaign is a preemptive ban on fully autonomous weapon systems. Emphasis on fully.
Preemptive stand against it. In other words, before they have been fully developed enough to be actually operational.
Exactly.
Then we're going to forbid them.
I mean, the thing about autonomous...
Is there some time to do that before they're operational, or are they pretty much ready to roll now? We're
on the verge. I think we're very close. And the thing about it, I mean, in arms control discussions, Metta, traditionally, the norm, the unfortunate pattern has been that we, the international community, the human species, we tend to be reactive, and it's very difficult to be proactive on these matters, even when the risks are apparent way ahead of time. So arms control efforts after a certain category of weapons has already been used, has already been deployed, are all that much harder. But here, in some cases, we have the opportunity to be proactive. I think that's the premise underlying the position of the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. Like, really, it's before they get out of hand, because if they do get out of hand, then it really will change the nature of warfare. You may have heard it's not my thing. I mean, it's often said, but that autonomous weapon systems are or constitute the third revolution in warfare. I mean, such is their significance. The first being gunpowder. There's always been constantly ways to improve warfare and getting better at killing each other, that sort of thing. But some changes just constitute huge paradigm shifts. So gunpowder was the first one. Like, all of a sudden you have a sword and the other guy is shooting at you. You're like, okay, this changes things. Then nuclear weapons, which of course, I mean, so exponentially powerful, more powerful than the next thing that, I mean, they just changed the dynamics and understandings of warfare and of winnability, and, you know, mutually assured destruction and all of that. And some people are saying autonomous weapon systems constitute the third revolution in warfare, because such is going to be the change. And there are fears that because they are not human, these, you know, things that are almost on the verge of emerging potentially, it will actually lower the threshold for going to warfare, because, you know, it might perpetuate a notion that, you know, we're not even risking humans. It's these things, but of course, you know, it takes little cynicism to see how that could get out of hand. But I think that beyond getting out of hand, and there are tough questions about compliance, really, with international humanitarian law, with fundamental precepts of international humanitarian law regarding proportionality, distinction, precaution, that you know that must be adhered to during warfare, and there are tough questions and there are no clear answers. But even if they could be answered, because my assumption is that they will be able to comply more and more with international humanitarian law, and this is not an argument for them. This is just about the perfection of technology. The accuracy will improve. The face recognition will improve. You know, those things. So we can't base our opposition only, although these are valid questions, only on technical shortcomings, because they will get there. You know, whatever technical shortcomings there are today, will get there with technology, but it will still be wrong. And I think the unmutable part of this equation is the ethical question about letting machines take a human life. Like, do we really as a species want to cross that line? Do we really want to let machines, running algorithms with no human interaction whatsoever?
Wouldn't you say that landmines, in a way, were machines that kill people with no interaction with people?
Yes, but
what is I hadn't really thought about this until this minute.
Right.
What would be the criterion that would distinguish something like that from a killer robot that involves maybe selective targeting, maybe?
Right. Yeah. No. Yes. That is part of something broader. The short answer is AI, artificial intelligence. That the landmine is dumb. I mean, it will break the leg of its owner, of the person who put it, if he or she is stupid enough to step, it's indiscriminate, etc. Autonomy implies, at least in theory, some sort of selection through algorithms, selection, detection, targeting, face recognition, a decision. I don't know if decision is the right word for non-human entities, to shoot and kill.
Yeah.
So there is some sort of I think therein lies the difference and thorny questions, no doubt. But that's why the campaign, the call for the ban, is focused on fully autonomous weapon systems. About those, because sometimes at CCW, and this is not uncommon at forums where arms control is debated, states are often holding up things with definitional precision. What do you really mean by autonomy? What do you really mean by this? What do you mean by lethality? What do you mean by dual use? So anyway, and that can be frustrating, et cetera, et cetera. But fully autonomous lends itself to very little ambiguity. Fully autonomous, I mean, what discussion can there be? Fully autonomous is fully autonomous. And we're calling for a preemptive ban on full autonomy, where once released, if you will, no more human interaction and they can still take lives. And that's what we have a problem with. And it's the sort of thing that is not going to happen overnight. Unlike, say, the nuclear question. the nuclear question, where the states or parties or actors that have the centrifuge and the specific capabilities are very few and trackable. And that's why Iran, has all the eyes of the world, and it's very hard to conceal that. Developments related to what might eventually become fully autonomous weapon systems are happening in a diffuse, dispersed manner in the private sector, in the military and universities, for benign purposes, for artificial intelligence, for perfecting the self-driving car, for perfecting, all of these things. And it's how those diverse applications might come together and create something we don't like. But what we're saying is governments have a role to play. Governments, have a role to play with policy, with regulation at the domestic level and at the international level, and in this case, have the opportunity to do so proactively.
Now, what do you think the odds are of being able to block that before it becomes operational? And what steps will you go through? Who's going to be able to make that happen, if anybody?
Well, there's such a thing as in other, there's experiences from other arms control realms that if there's the vague to define as it is political will, and a state or a core group of states champions that really see value and normative value in advancing those conversations in a methodical manner and leading to a concrete outcome, i.e., a code of conduct or confidence, transparency and confidence building measures, or hard treaty law, what have you. It's possible, that's what needs to happen. But they need to take ownership, and I sense a fear, especially in advanced countries, in the powers and second-tier powers, etc., of a bit of an apprehension, a fear of limiting their military. A fear of tying the hands of their military, a fear of committing to something that if someone else cheats, they might regret, being the good player that's there. But we still see tremendous value in these normative. I mean, even just to name a few of the huge sectors where this AI military nexus is emerging. The military, industry, and academia. In liberal democracies, at least, the government can set limits, legitimate limits on the nature of the research, on the nature of the applications, on how it's going to be implemented. Is there possibility for cheating? Of course, there always is, but still setting the bar higher in terms of what's permissible. And we a few minutes ago, or some 20 or 30 minutes ago, we talked about language and discourse, and now in the context of refugees, of what rhetoric is acceptable. I think governments must also reinforce the rhetoric that non-human entities cannot, under any circumstances, be taking human lives.
Right. Okay. Well, okay. Now, when you were there last year, was this just kind of a get-together to talk it over, or was it like a preliminary stage in developing a treaty or some process of, say, open-ended working groups, for example, as they had done with the TPNW?
Right.
Got that. They started off with that kind of thing. Was there any initiative? Is there any initiative going on?
There is a push for something called a GG, a group of governmental experts to tackle specifically the issue of autonomous weapons. Branca, my colleague, I was there last year with her. The last meeting, she was there, just her. And she told me that one of the things that struck her was the lack of clarity from Canada, from the Canadian delegate, from the Canadian government in terms of their position with regard to fully autonomous weapon systems. And apparently, when one of the agenda items came up, where various states were stating their positions, Canada went into a spiel about feminism or gender or something like that, which is welcome in general, but sort of out of order and unrelated to the core question there. States, I mean, will likely continue to say it's premature, it's too soon to commit, etc. But I'm very weary of premature in arms control. Where in nuclear disarmament, where the premature line of argument has us. And again, as the Campaign to Stop Nuclear Robots, maintains, as a position that Ploughshares support, for fully autonomous weapons, it's not premature. The full autonomy is as problematic today as it will be, whenever. So hopefully there will be more conversations on this topic. I think it may suffer a little bit from the sci-fi feeling it evokes, that whereby the regular public might see it as something detached from their reality or far into the future. But it's not, I mean, not to sound alarmist, it's not my intention, but it's not far into the future as one might think. The technology is we're sending cars to orbit, in space. So, I mean, the technology is moving quite rapidly. Space, for instance, now that I mention it, and just because is another area that Project Ploughshares pays attention to, and another one where we note a great awareness gap between the huge implications of the sustainability of outer space for terrestrial activities, for terrestrial peace and security, and for terrestrial social and economic benefits, and the level of awareness that the average person has. People probably drive to work on their GPS, using their GPS, listening to satellite radio, they went to the ATM, and don't think twice that everything is, many things are reliant on the sustainability of space systems. And there are countries developing negation capabilities, anti-satellite weapon systems, which,
Okay. In fact, that's the interesting thing. When last week or so, Trump announced his plans to develop a space force.
Indeed.
And I thought we had an international agreement to prohibit the use of outer space for weapons. Isn't that the case? It sounds to me as if that's been completely forgotten.
It's more or less the case. It's more or less the case. There is something called from 1967 called the Outer Space Treaty.
Right.
And the Outer Space Treaty only explicitly prohibits weapons of mass destruction in space, because that was top of mind at that time. So weapons of mass destruction are explicitly prohibited. But short of weapons of mass destruction, there is no explicit prohibition. There are vague aspirations to the peaceful uses of outer space. But to give you an example, today, and there's no going back, today, military uses are generally understood to fall under peaceful uses, because if they're not like kinetic force, they're not physically attacking or shooting, but reconnaissance, surveillance, intelligence, troop support, targeting, precision targeting, guiding, all of that. I'm not saying it's commendable, but I'm saying few are challenging that as a hard departure from the peaceful aspirations. I think the line where it's drawn is on the ability to interfere with space systems from Earth or from space, or to interfere with air systems or applications from space. And this takes many forms, from an anti-satellite weapon to temporary blinding or dazzling of a satellite.
They were working on anti-satellite weapons as if they have a perfect right to do it. Not only that, but if I recall, and you were there too, in Halifax a year or so ago,
right?
And, this lovely woman from the Union of Concerned Scientists gave
Laura.
How these things that are supposed to intercept ballistic missiles, what do you call them? Ballistic missile defense.
Interceptors?
There's a short word for it. I can't think of it. But, things that are developed to shoot down incoming missiles. Those are no damn good. They won't work. They never will work. It's just too hard to do. But what they are very good at is shooting out other people's satellites. So if we had, and here's where you get the connection between warfare and cyber warfare, because sitting here on Earth with one of those gadgets, shooting down your enemy's satellite would disable all kinds of good things, their GPS and their
right, and create a cloud of debris in space, which is a problem in its own right. A big, huge problem. The debris cloud. But the BMD question, ballistic missile defense, and it will come to Canada in force sooner or later. I'm sure, because there's always those pressures, from the U.S. and from within NATO to join BMD systems, to increase military spending, etc. But on BMD in particular, it strikes me because it's a very good case study where policy is clearly not being driven by evidence. This is like millions upon millions of dollars that every authoritative scientist, scientist, it's money down the drain. They don't work. It creates more insecurity than security. The arguments are solid, yet administration after administration, Democrat and Republican, they keep, in this sort of inertia of spending on ballistic missile defense when the arguments are against it are so solid and so remarkably widespread. Everyone who knows physics, a bit of physics, is like, yeah, it doesn't really work. Or it works in controlled scenarios, but with decoys. There's ways of outsmarting it, or whatever the word is. So it's a shame.
Well, let's hope that common sense kicks in before the inertia of having to throw good money after bad, which is what I think the explanation is for why people are unwilling to let go of BMD.
Right.
Anyway, let's hope it kicks in to forestall the development of this Space Force thing. And Mike Byers, you may have noticed in the Globe the other day, wrote an article saying, it ain't going to happen.
Well, apparently it was.
Sorry, Trump, but you can't do that because you're going to just create so much space debris, and they're already so scared to death about the amount of space debris now.
But apparently the backstory is that this was supposed to be a very mundane, non-headline making news conference about an initiative related to space traffic management. And apparently Trump, being Trump, spoke off the cuff and said, and we're going to create a Space Force. And it's going to be huge.
Yeah, and beautiful. And we're big in space.
Exactly. But
sorry, guys, the space is bigger than you are, I'm afraid. You know what? We just about used up our time. And we're supposed to theoretically be finished with our conversation at 9:00, and I haven't even gotten around to asking you
the first topic of the ban treaty.
The ban treaty, we have to talk about it a little bit because we both got the thing in the mail today from ICANN with this extremely interesting. I spent the last 2 hours reading things about the survey they've been doing of the 4 countries in Europe that actually have U.S. missile, U.S. nuclear weapons on European soil. And those people want them out. And
well, I assure you, I would bet that if we replicated that polling, it might just be done. In Canada, it will yield similar results that people would favor, the ban treaty and renouncing completely nuclear weapons, including in the NATO context. But
well, it's not a theoretical question because there have been surveys done, lots of them, but not lately, so far as I know. The last I made a table. I went through Google and stuff a few years ago and collected every piece of evidence I could about the attitudes of Canadians with respect to nuclear weapons.
Right.
And the most recent one was several years ago, but it said 88% of Canadians want disarmament. And that's pretty much as high as it goes. I mean, there are other countries that are about on that level. Every other country in the world, with I think one exception, briefly Pakistan, and another survey that showed that Israel Those were the only two surveys out of a dozen or more.
Right. But you know what? This is
country. Actually, the majority of people wanted nuclear weapons for their country. So Pakistanis briefly, at any rate, did, and Israelis also apparently did for a while. But otherwise, every other country in the world, and in fact, even they were, it would be like 49% or something like that would want nuclear disarmament. It was almost 50%. But every other country in the world, the majority of the people wanted nuclear disarmament. And, this is supposed to be a democracy. I don't know what's going wrong, but
there's something to be said about that point, about it being a democracy. I mean, I can tell you one thing. On the issue of nuclear disarmament in the Canadian context, anyone and everyone worth their salt, who follows nuclear disarmament has profound apprehensions about the government's position. Everyone. I mean, this includes academics, former diplomats, NGO people, grassroots campaigners, everyone. So I do wonder, that's going to tell you something, even, more than one. And, former ambassadors for disarmament and very authoritative peace activists and scholars, etc. So there's something odd there, because in our conversations with Ottawa, with the Canadian government, with the Department of Foreign Affairs, it's and we've had consultations. That point becomes very clear. There's such a huge divide that how do you explain that? I mean, these are entirely reasonable, well-meaning people outside of government who've been following the issue for decades, for longer than many diplomats who are posted, to different files over their career, etc. And there's that huge divide.
Well, okay, but how is that different from the same thing we were talking about a minute ago? All these people wanting ballistic missile defenses, even though, as you say, all the evidence in the world says it'll never work. Can't be done.
Yeah. Well, part of maybe the explanation is we're doomed as maybe people are stupid in the end in their decision-making processes, and we there's a pattern of poor decisions. But I think, I've thought this is such low-hanging fruit for a Canadian Prime Minister. I mean, I wish one would be lucky to be, Trudeau or Harper, to be the Prime Minister of this country and have that legacy ripe for the taking. That easy, very easy legacy where the Trudeau wouldn't even have to deliver on complete nuclear abolition. Just take it and run with it for a little bit. And there's your legacy, even from a selfish perspective. I assure you, the world and Canada would value such a move, even challenging NATO Canadians. It's beyond me. Well, it's not beyond me. I mean, it's fully clear to me that Canadian decisions with regard to this file go beyond Ottawa, and involve Washington, D.C. and Brussels, because the U.S. and NATO, it's undeniable, have some sway on our foreign policy.
Let's just briefly about NATO, by the way, and the rules of, there's been a dispute among peace activists here in Canada as to whether or not Canada can sign the Treaty on the Prohibition and remain in NATO. That's quite apart from the question of whether we should or want to remain in NATO.
Right.
I'm not going to deal with that. That's too complicated for this 30 seconds or whatever we have left. But the thing that I read today, I don't know whether you read that whole document about the polls that ICANN had done in Europe, and they cite a Harvard study and one other institution I didn't recognize, saying that yes, indeed, you can still stay in NATO if in fact you want to, and sign the TPNW. Now, how authoritative that is, I don't know, but it ought to at least provoke a certain kind of conversation in Ottawa.
Right. It should, but at the same time, I don't think it's a matter. I mean, maybe I think the attention of this debate is misguided, and I know which debate you're talking about, and I see it in the peace lists, people with, as if it was a matter of Trudeau or the Canadian government saying we really would like to sign on the TPNW, except we can't because we're tied by these commitments. They're not saying that. They don't want the TPNW. They've gone on the record to discredit the TPNW, which is unfortunate. But a key implication of this is that even if they wanted to, and I hope they come around, and I believe they come around, they need some sort of face-saving strategy, because they put themselves in a corner of their own making. I mean, they discredited the TPNW so much that, to come on board, they have to say either, oops, we were wrong when we said it was useless, or something to that effect. But yeah, I think it will come around. You know what I read today? That there's in the UK, there are all this Brexit mess, and now the senior political figures are leaving the government, and Boris Johnson left the interior. Anyway, Theresa May was saying, and she was quoted in the front page of The Guardian, that if this continues, there was a real risk of Jeremy Corbyn coming to power.
Jeremy Corbyn doesn't want to make a position. Apparently, Jeremy Corbyn kind of sits on the fence and wants to say, well, the people of Britain have made their decision and we have to live with it. If I think if Jeremy Corbyn would come out and say, yes, we want to fight Brexit, how do I know?
But my point was another. My point was another, that in this nuclear disarmament enterprise, including the TPNW, I believe that it's a matter of time before there is a crack within either NATO, the Canadas of NATO, the non-nuclear weapon states of NATO, or the actual nuclear weapon states. It takes one and it throws everything out of whack. Mm-hmm. And of the states with actual nuclear weapons, the most likely, not by any means guaranteed, but the most likely scenario of having a somewhat significant change in position regarding nuclear weapons or nuclear doctrine would be a Corbyn win in Britain. I mean, it's because in other, it may be something along those lines, or say, in Canada, if the NDP, not that I'm endorsing any party, but if in any country, if a party that has campaigned on the record for the abolition of nuclear weapons and for the TPNW, if they were elected or they were called presidential system or whatever, parliamentary, to form government or to lead a government, and they're coherent, that may be, a significant step forward. Imagine a militant pro-disarmament Britain, the power that,
Well, yes, but now this document, this long thing that I spent 2 hours reading and didn't finish yet, did cite a number of cases that I didn't know about, where there is, in every one of those countries, there has been strong opposition to having nuclear weapons on their soil. And several times they've come pretty damn close to having some legislation passed or something. It could happen that any one of those 4 countries could.
Again, going back to the UK, I don't know if you recall the Scottish referendum, and so just a few years ago, Scotland clearly doesn't want nukes, and the fast lane base where where the Trident submarines are located, that's in Scotland, and there was at least a possibility that if Scotland were to gain its independence, it would at least pose some logistical headaches for Britain in terms of its Trident submarines. But yeah, I mean, I think the TPNW, I mean, nations will gradually come around. I'm sure it will enter into force. But I also think the focus of the abolition community must go beyond the mere universalization, the collection of signatures for the TPNW, valuable as it is, because I highly value it, and I think it's a tremendous political statement. But there's tactical nukes in Europe. There's work to be done in North Korea. There's salvaging the Iran deal. There's India and Pakistan. There's the opacity and with Israel's nuclear weapons program and the complicity, and there's all sorts of different. Among them, I wholeheartedly believe the TPNW. But in addition, I think there's all sorts of areas that are fertile ground for progress, some of which will make imagine the concrete impact on actual security conditions of taking tactical nuclear weapons out of Europe. It'd be tremendous.
Absolutely. Okay, look, it's 12 minutes afterwards. I don't know what we're going to do about this because I'm overdue. Anyway, we got to stop. Yeah. I'd love to talk all evening. And
I'm sure we could.
No question at all. Anyway, thanks so much. This has been delightful. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.